Morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I am Vijaya Narafredi from the University of Denver, and welcome to this meeting that the STR Teaching Committee has been putting together, worked very hard, and my screen, yes, that's better. And it's the first teaching event for this year, but we have an August panel. Before I introduce the panelists, I want to thank my colleagues here on the teaching committee, Jennifer Nippen from Eckerd College, Giada Di Stefano from Bocconi, Peter Merman from University of St. Gallen, Henning Piazunka from INSEAD, John Maudsley from HEC France. And then, of course, we should also thank John Joseph from UC Irvine, who's been our liaison on this committee and has helped us quite a deal in putting this together, especially the technology side and the communication side. Thank you all. And we have an August panel today. It's a treat to have them early this morning. And Russ Koff from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Tammy Madsen from Santa Clara University, Marka Moen from University of North Carolina, and Charles Williams from Bocconi University. I hope you join me in welcoming this panel who has taken the time off to talk to us about their insights on teaching online. And we have an interesting agenda today. We are starting off, of course, with my introductions, which I'm going to conclude in a few minutes. We have 3 different presentations about online teaching, completely online, face-to-face, and the discussion would be Tammy with Henning, and then blended with Marka and Russ, and John would be interviewing, hybrid with Charlie and Giada, and 15 minutes I would request, and my team members would request you to mute yourselves and please put your questions in the chat box, and chat box will be monitored by Peter, and we will actually make a summary of the questions or raise some important questions taken from the chat box. Peter will do that in the last 5 minutes of each segment. So without further ado, I would welcome Henning and Tammy now to start the fully online and face-to-face. But before I give them the floor, we will have 8 breakout rooms after these presentations with 3 topics, and Jennifer would be monitoring that as well as leading that kind of discussion, in the breakout rooms. And of course, I'll come back and make concluding comments. So welcome again. Henning, take it away.
Okay, super. So this is with great pleasure. Tammy has kindly agreed to share a little bit her experiences with us about like fully online teaching, face-to-face teaching. It's with great pleasure. And Tammy is, for those probably most of you already know, is a very accomplished teacher and researcher. She's their MCAC Foundation Professor at Santa Clara University, and so it's great that we can tap a little bit in her expertise. Without further ado, Tammy, I would kind of jump right in, and I think address a topic which is on a lot of our people's mind, is the question: how do you actually ensure engagement from your students? Right? It's easily that people who are in Zoom actually zoom off, and so we are curious about what have been strategies that have worked for you to continue to engage the students.
Oh, thank you, Henning, and thanks to the team, and especially thanks to Giada, who encouraged me to participate today. I really appreciate the invitation, and I'm excited about learning from everyone here. So I'm primarily teaching synchronous sessions to executive MBAs and MBA students, and so just that's been my audience. And in terms of engagement, I think about kind of 2 things. One, with the goal of avoiding those moments where you feel like Charlie Brown's teacher and you're sort of just, you think the students are hearing wah, 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 right? So 2 activities: session design and then fostering community. So on the session design, I think it's helpful to have 2 to 3 formats in mind about how you might roll out the content of your session. We all hear about this chunking. There was a recent article that Harvard put out and the number of materials they're putting out, which kind of framed this as regulating activities in short burst intervals. And that sort of resonated with me very much like a HIT exercise or a HIT routine. And this, I think, helps to manage energy levels over long sessions, 4-hour sessions, if you will. But I think you can take these and chunk them into, 2-hour sessions. So I would also preface this by saying my sweet spot is in teaching or orchestrating a very rigorous case discussion. So I'm not a fan of having students present the case. And yet most of the classes that I had, training classes I had this summer, were like, oh, we'll have the students do the case, right? So that doesn't always, I think, provide the same learning experience that I want them to have. So I want them to think on their feet, and I want to foster a dialogue. So trying to figure out ways to chunk up the material to enable that. And I think about a kind of 4-block process. I always start off with a poll or a vote. I want them to exercise their judgment muscles, commit to a choice, and then defend that in the context of their discussions. Do an energizer session, which is about a 10 to 15 minute piece. It could be the case tee-up, a 5 to 7 minute concept discussion, or maybe one of the first questions from the case. And during this session, I will make sure that I cold call on that Zoom back row, because I want to make sure that they're aware that they need to get engaged right away. Then I'll have a breakout session, and we'll follow that breakout with a full discussion. I'll have probably random groups, maybe 3 to 4 students per breakout. They're assigned different sub-questions, or if we have a large number of teams, I'll have pairs of teams assign the same sub-question. And then instead of a report back, I'll just ask each team for one comment as we begin the discussion, and then sort of open it up to a broader discussion for the entire class. For these breakouts, I set up Google Sheets or Google Slides, and so the students can add content simultaneously. And I ask them to put their names on these docs so I can review them. I might not always go back and review them, but it's setting an expectation that there's a job to be done and that they're expected to kind of contribute to that, and try to make these easy to find, right? So put them in a Canvas spot where it's really obvious where they're at. Even then, there's a lot of hand-holding with my group in terms of like, we'll go here they are. And then Canvas, there's a collaboration function. So you could use, if you have pre-assigned teams for written assignments, you can use that pre-assigned group. That would work. Then the students could just sort of submit their docs that they create there. So then we'll do a second breakout, with a report back of 1 to 2 points per team, and then a wrap-up and reflection. So kind of 5 modules, if you will, within that 2-hour block. Then in terms of fostering community, I think we're all aware that, start a little early, try to have, open this Zoom room early, get everybody engaged and chit chat. But I think at the beginning of the quarter, what's incredibly important is maybe the first 2 to 3 sessions have some interactions, multiple rounds of opportunities for the students to interact. So share the 5th video in your phone, changing the virtual background, what's your pandemic triumph, but something in small group interactions that can get them talking and bring up their energy level and get them engaged. During class, especially for longer sessions, and when the energy levels just died out, I'll try to do a random jolt or a shock to the system. So get them to stop and sort of kind of wake up. And whether that's, put this kind of statement in the chat, it could be some random fact, or it could be something related to the discussion, but something to catch their attention. One key point from the case discussion, or pick a topic that's resonating with you in that context. Another one, which is a little fun, is show and tell. And you have three minutes to find something in your house that illustrates corporate strategy. Come back and we'll pick sort of 5 people randomly to show us what they have. You'd be surprised what people come up with. So that's a good one. And it also gives them a break from being in front of the screen for a few minutes. And then if they're just incredibly not really there today, I might do participation exercises, which is kind of like a pop quiz and a 2-pair breakout, and send them off, and then they'll come back and we'll have a conversation about that. I'm still trying to figure out how to use chat more constructively in the classroom, but Zoom reactions are a good way to take the temp of the room. And then I think it's really important just to sort of figure out some policies in advance for how chat might be used. So one of my colleagues had her students going through a long discussion about curry recipes in their chat at the beginning of the quarter. So for me right now, figuring out ways to bring chat back into the dialogue, I'll do a random pick, or I'll look at what they've done while they're in their breakouts and then pull some thoughts from it as we go forward. Other people have TAs to do that. I think that's great. I just don't have one. So those are kind of the two sort of pieces for that part of the fostering community and setting up the class session. as a way of engagement.
Got it. But now everybody should understand why we have Tammy for the section. She's obviously very thoughtful and experienced about this. So Tammy, as you, so I think, you know, there's this moment, and I probably a lot of us have shared this before, their first teaching experience, no matter what format, right? You have an idea what is going to happen in the classroom, and then you're actually in the classroom. I remember this for myself. The first time I taught, I thought I have material for like 90 minutes, and after 30 minutes, I was through my material, and I wonder what I'm going to do now. So I'm curious, were there things that kind of surprised you, that worked well for you, that didn't go bad? Like, what are things you did not anticipate when making the step to teaching online?
Well, so on the point about less is more, less is a lot more in this context. I even, you know, colleagues had said in the spring, oh, well, just teach the cases the same way you do. And I was like, I'm not sure if that's going to work. And so I thought, well, for every 2 hours, maybe 15 minutes less planned for, but I think it's closer to 30. So I'd be interested in hearing people, maybe they can put in the chat what they think it is. Is it 80% or 70% of the content that you typically could get through in that same duration of time? So I think making sure that you're managing the attention level. I'm finding that my students are overwhelmed with so many things outside of the classroom, more so than ever. And so this is really what's affecting part of this as well. It does have me concerned about everything that we'll be able to get to the students, but the timing piece, figuring out, calibrating that, is it 90%, is it 80%, is a challenge. One of the surprising pieces for me is that I do a lot of ad hoc whiteboarding when I'm in the physical classroom. And I sort of didn't really think as much about this before I started my first class, but that hasn't been as effective in this space. And so one of the things that I do now, a kind of a best practice, if you will, or a change, is that I'll port my slide deck into an app like Notability, and I'll include blank slides in that deck, and then I'll display from that deck, from the iPad. So I avoid this transition between PowerPoint and the iPad and all that. So I see a lot of heads nodding. Everybody sort of figured this out before me probably, but it seems to work much, much better, right? And I can easily do it ad hoc whiteboarding, and all those things work out much, much better. So that tends to be much more effective. And you can also, you know, port those back to your desktop and then upload them to Canvas or port them directly to the Dropbox. The second thing that was super surprising was that, you know, in the face-to-face environment, I hold office hours, and typically by appointment, by person or phone, because I have evening students or weekend students. And this time I've been holding a lot more open office hours on Zoom, and it's become this kind of expanded touch point, almost an additional class session, because what happens is a large number of students sign on just to listen. They have this option with Zoom. We wouldn't have 15 students coming to my office to listen to one person ask a question, right? So it's an expanded touch point. I do a lot more whiteboarding during these sessions. I have yet to have one of them end early. And it's great feedback for me because I'm learning a bit more about what concepts did they find confusing? Where are there big gaps in their knowledge base? What was it that I thought they actually got? And no, it's pretty clear that a group of them are unsure about this particular concept. So that's really helpful. I mean, there's moments I think where we're in the Zoom space and we just sort of feel like there's this huge kind of filter between us and the students. And you know, are they hearing what we're saying? What's going on, right? So I think those two things are part of the important part. I think the monitoring chat is still something I'm working on, figuring out ways to deal with that.
Are there things that you would have expected to work well on Zoom, but ended up not working well?
You know, I think that you think the technology is going to work seamlessly, and there's not the gaps aren't going to be that long, and you know, so yeah, everything is just slower. Right. So we're patient in the class when we ask a question. It might be silence for what seems like 2 minutes, but it's probably 15 seconds. And so here, when there's a pause, you ask a question, you're waiting back. There's clearly a delay. And so being patient, much more patient than I have been in the past, is becoming really important. Right. So that's one thing. The other part is that while I require students to have video on, there are students that are sort of just not turning their camera on, no matter how many times I nudge them, right? And so that is something that's a bit of a challenge, and it's not a technology issue, right? So I didn't anticipate that they would be so resistant, right, to being recorded. We have all our class sessions recorded, so that is part of the challenge. But one of the other pieces here is that this has enabled us to do some other things that weren't as easy to do before. So for instance, this Saturday, I'm running a live case session with Western Digital, where we'll have a number of executives from different locations coming into the classroom with us and spending time going through a case with us. And they can all be present in a way that they would not be able to be present in the traditional face-to-face room. So I'm trying to think about more ways to do things like that we could not do in the previous space. Sort of, how can we take advantage of this particular space, and how does it work better for certain things?
Yeah, I like what you say about, like, to certainly we're just expecting that things will not go as fast as you would like to, because I think if one expects that, it becomes a little bit easier not to kind of go nuts when one actually presents or teaches. Tell me, so like what is advice you would give yourself for the future? So you see, like, you're your own consultant here. So what's what kind of advice would you give your future self, so to speak, if things you want to change in the future?
I'm this mantra of less is more, less is more, less is more. And I tend to overpack things as it is. And so I always have a bit extra in case we have extra time. And so I just want to I'm really stepping back, especially for planning for next quarter, about thinking through what are the clear pieces here that I need to make sure get across. How can I reduce the cognitive load without compromising learning? Right? So really whittling it down to what's the main point. And my concern is sort of this, this balance, careful balance about stripping too much out, but also sort of making sure that you're not just, there's not a lot of noise around the key point that you want to provide. And I think, creating videos or slide narrations, all of that is an incredible good exercise in fine tuning our I don't want to say script, we don't usually use a script in the classroom, but fine tuning that sort of the set of things that we want to say and how we want to communicate them. So those are and then I think the other part is, just take a breath. It's all right. If the technology doesn't work, the students understand they're working in Zoom all day in their jobs. And so they're like, oh, it's all right. It went down. So my first day of class this past quarter, my internet died. It was only down for a little bit, but I was like, oh. And yeah, I came back and they were all talking about the case and they were fine. Right. So it's also that sort of making sure that, look, they're okay. Yeah.
Got it. Tell me, so besides, as important as teaching is to all of us, right, we have other parts in our lives, in our professional lives, in our personal lives. And so I wondered a little bit, like, how your process has changed. Has the time you spend on preparation gone up? Has that gone down? What is kind of, you see, like, outside of the 4-hour block that you're teaching, do you spend more or less time on teaching these days?
I think I'm spending more this quarter. I'm learning a lot about the technologies. I'm learning a lot about how to use them more effectively, but also a lot more thinking through my class plans. I have I think we all have these things, like we have board layouts that don't populate necessarily over, right? So we have, if I have a big whiteboarding sort of board layout, I can't make connections in the same way across those 4 different boards. I'm figuring out ways to do that, but it doesn't happen in the same way. So there's, thinking carefully through what do I need to do? What could I cut out? What can I manage? And then sort of just, take a breath, kind of, it's all right. But I'm spending a lot more time. I think, I don't know, learning Camtasia is one piece. I wish I'd spent more time on that in the summertime, right? I've adopted a new app, Doodly, which I'm creating some whiteboard animation with. But I think the core part is really, you don't have to have all these tools around it. It's really getting what those core pieces are that you need in the classroom and being very effective at those. And then you can layer on these other pieces as you're going, right? So.
Tell me one final question, and this is a little bit triggered by what you said before. And maybe this is something you can answer now, but it would be great if you could also kind of take a note in the chat after this conversation. Is if you could give like a short list, like, of the main tools you're using. I've heard here Notability, you just mentioned another. So do you have at hand like an overview over the key tools you're using in your teaching?
So right now I'm using mostly Camtasia. I'm starting to use Camtasia more. Doodly, I use narration over Zoom. If you have a good script and it's quick, you can edit it. I've tried Jamboard and Stormboard, which are both ideation apps. And then a note-taking app, Notability. I'm interested in learning others as well. But those are the 5 sort of things that I'm playing around with right now. Right. And I'll add them in the chat just so everybody has them.
That would be great. Tammy, I've learned a ton here. So I hope this is shared by many people on the call. So thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Henning. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you,
Tammy.
Yes, thank you both, Tammy and Henning. Peter, would you please take?
Yeah. So I monitored the chat. There were also a lot of comments. Tammy, I want to raise one comment because some of the other questions I think will be addressed in the next 2 sessions. But I heard you say in the beginning that you are only teaching cases. Is that correct, or is your entire class based on one case after another, or how do you actually do other stuff, or do you do other stuff?
No, I do content as well, but I think I tend to intersperse the kind of lectures about concepts into my case discussions. So, so we might have a conversation about the first question for a case, and then I might pop up a framework. Well, you read about this framework, let's apply it in the next session. And we'll work through the sort of tensions. Sometimes that requires a little bit more time on that concept, but in the Zoom environment, I'm finding if I lecture for longer than 10 minutes, I start to lose the audience. So for some of that content, I'll spend a little bit more time. There is a session where I have, I don't have a case. I have a lot of different videos, short videos within that session, but I've designed it to be interactive. So ideally, it would be sort of like an hour-and-a-half lecture straight, but in fact, it's over 3 hours. It's these little 5-minute, 7-minute pieces, and then we have conversations about them. So I think it goes back to how you structure the session. Right. And then, so for things like, if you had some concept on competitive advantage that you were going to spend 15 minutes on, can you tee it up in the classroom, but have them watch a video outside of it? Right. So a slide narration or a separate video that you've created that talks about that concept, but so you don't have to spend that. You're not spending 15 minutes just walking them through it in class, because I really feel I'm losing them when I'm spending too much time as a talking head. Yeah. So it's much more a combination, I'd say.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks for clarifying this, because I had a little bit of impression this was all a case class,
It is largely case-based, but it's it's infused with content, right? So
yeah. Okay, fantastic. So let's move on, and I'm going to reserve some of the questions for the later sessions. So for example, Peter Klein had a question, but I want to come back to this after we've heard the other 2 sessions, because I think they touch upon this. So V, if you want to take over and introduce the next speakers.
Yes, thank you, Peter. So we are, we are lucky to have the speakers again, and we learned quite a bit in the first segment with Tammy and Henning. Now we'll move on to Maka and Russ. We have 2 speakers here, and John would be actually interviewing them. John, take it away.
Thank you, V, and thank you, Peter. Okay, so thank you to Russ and Maka for giving up their time to come and inform us on blended content. So just a clarification on what blended is. So blended is when your course is, for example, 50% asynchronous content, independent learning by the students, and 50% face-to-face. Which of course right now means 50% online and 50% asynchronous. But so this is something that we've introduced into the strategy course at HEC this year. We already have a lot of asynchronous content, so we're taking advantage of that. But in our finance course, it's been used for a number of years to great success. And I actually think it represents a great opportunity to transform our teaching beyond the pandemic and really kind of institutionalize a new way of teaching. So we do have 2 for the price of 1. We have Russ and Maka, who Maka is going to talk to us about how she transformed the course and answer the similar type of questions that Henning posed to Tammy. And Russ, being Russ, he has a number of things he can talk to us about from his toolbox, and he's going to get you guys engaged with a little exercise. So without further ado, I'm going to ask the same questions to Maka that Henning asked. So when you were recreating and teaching your new MBA course, how did you ensure the engagement from the students, particularly on the asynchronous side of things? What surprised you, good and bad? And then if you can leave us with a few best practices or tips, that would be great. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, John, and thanks everybody for first scheduling this session. I think I wish I had one of these before I start this journey of blending my own class at UNC. So I have a couple of slides I thought that will help us sort of be more right to the point, along the lines that Tammy said, like these online sessions actually go faster than you assume. Somehow things are slower. And what I'm going to talk about is based on actually two experiences that I've had. Even before the pandemic, it's been now 3 years that I've been involved with the blended class format at UNC. This year, I had to recreate it for a second class, so the experiences are a little bit like longer in place. Getting to John's first question about what surprised me, and I know a good number of folks on this call will be experiencing these formats for the first time. The surprising part was actually it works really well. I was very happy by the end of the first time that I taught the blended format with respect to how happy the students were, with respect to their own experience, how happy I was about all those things that maybe the classroom format does not allow us to do, whereas in a blended environment, you get to really hone those down. Now, to the specific tips, and I'll talk about the aspects of engagements and others along some of these topics. So when you think about the blended class, it's really like 3 questions that become central. One is that what content do you want to put in that pre-class digital independent learning that students will have? What is it that will go into the class format, now the Zoom environment these days, and then how to create that digital content and how to adjust the in-class experience, because honestly, this is not, the in-class part is not going to be your typical class format that you've had. For this separation between what goes into digital versus in-class, I found that like what works well is that there are several aspects of our teaching when there is a one-way communication from the instructor to the student. Even outside of the Zoom environment, students get fatigued if you start talking for more than, I won't even say 10 minutes. Just like 3 to 4 minutes, you have to have something to wake them up. And those are exactly the type of things that can easily go into digital content. And there are tons of other interactions that students have with each other that don't need the instructor to be present there. And I feel like those are, again, the ones that can be easily pushed into the pre-class format. But the question that arises here is, hey, in a strategy class, we rarely have lectures. Maybe some classes like accounting, finance will lend themselves easier to this. Hey, I'm going to tell you all the formula, how to solve this problem, and you listen to them. I've experienced this. I have an engineering background, and in my undergrad program, like the professor used to talk for the entire 90 minutes. Like there was no role for the student to interact. And we know in strategy, it's very much case-based. So even if you lecture, it's going to be difficult to say, hey, I had like 30 minutes to talk. Now I'll take that and make it pre-recorded lecture. That won't be possible because we probably peppered those 30 minutes of discussions along with like tons of like 5 minutes, let me talk, let you talk category of things. So that's one complication. And along that line, what I found is on my wish list every year, it's been like, hey, I wish my students read that reading that I assigned more carefully. I wish I could assign 5 more readings, something more rigorous from the research we do in SMJ Org Science, and then translate it for them to read, and they typically don't do it. So those lectures that you prepare before the class, they lend themselves to that option. And for student interactions, digital discussion boards, feedback that students give to each other, and even their team presentations, I found something that can easily be transferred into pre-recorded lectures. Now you ask them to record their own team presentations and put it up there. Now, moving to the second box around like how to actually create the pre-class digital content, I'll again have one good news here, and that is, a student love to have these lectures pre-recorded for them. They can watch it, they can rewatch it, they can pause, let it go fast if it's too familiar for them, or like it's just you'll hear a lot of good news around that. So let me put you at ease and comfort if that's something you're undertaking this year. But the complications that arise is one, the issue of assurance of learning. In class, you sort of see students, hey, are they confused? Are they moving along with you? But if they're watching a 10-minute lecture, you don't get to have that. And if they have a question, sort of this idea for them to keep their questions and come back to the next class is sort of problematic. So I've started having these ask me boxes after every video and have them type the questions that they have, type the thing that they remember. This puts a lot of pressure on the faculty and the TA team that I have later. Let's say about 300 students in an MBA program, then you have 300 questions to answer after the class, but it sort of addresses that assurance of learning. And there are tons of things that you'll be surprised that the students would not have asked in a normal class. They didn't feel comfortable to raise their hand, but now you see it's being repeated and repeated in that private ask me button. Now, with respect to the implementation of, as you have now learned from our virtual environment, it's very difficult to talk in front of a camera. Imagine if you know there is nobody out there and you're confined to a box in front of your camera. There will be a lot of that you want to avoid in your video. So I found having a script really, really helps. Writing a script, though, is very difficult. So as a tip, just talk through your presentation once, then have a software script that, and then read that while recording. That has been a huge time saving for me. I've done this for 8 hours of material. I've prepared 8 hours of video. So believe me, that will save you tons of time. Also prepare, I would say, 3 times more material as you would do in a class. In a class, things go very fast. If you're teaching 5 courses in a full session, that's good. But if you want to record that, it will take you 20 minutes to go through all the content. So if your university has sort of this plan of let's like devote a strict number of hours and minutes towards certain material, then you have to come up with extra stuff to fill that in. And I can chat more about these in breakout rooms later. Also get professional helps. It's very difficult for students to follow slides with a talking head. So I know like Ross had David K had some of these really good videos, Doodle in the past. I was able to get help from some freelancers to help me create videos. My sister has been an amazing help there with the technology. It's just see what you can do. Now, adjusting your in-class experience. One thing I'll emphasize over and over and over is that your in-class adjustment and experience is a new session. The thing that I hear from all students who hated other classes and then helped me adjust my own class was that they don't want the instructor to repeat the same material that they watched in the video. So be very, very aware of that. That's a surprising negative aspect. I think on case discussions, Tammy already discussed how you can manage them. I think this is not very different from this side of the blended class is not very different from an online environment on its own. Applications, examples, and news, these are the things that you can embed in the pre-digital content, get the students to give you the material, and then you call on them in the class to sort of create that continuity between pre-class digital and the in-class live experience. This year, students are missing a lot on community building. They don't see each other in hallways. They don't get to check on each other. It's just tough. I know this is sort of at the end of the first semester, and I know some of my students haven't talked to their colleagues in their program. So I've started having breakout rooms that are just for the purpose of checking in, say hi to each other and come back. We have like 2 hours of strategy cafe outside of class to come and chit chat. This is not office hour. This is us to just talk about whatever you were cooking this day, maybe. And then studying from home conditions are getting tough. So be aware, be a little bit kinder on that front, or more accommodating there. So this has been like sort of what I've gathered in the past 3 years of experience in this area, and happy to chat further too. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
John, you're muted. Do you want me to just go?
Sorry, I was muted. So yeah, so thank you, Maka, and yeah, Russ, you just go.
Okay. Thank you, Maka. You covered. You made it easy for me. You covered the right stuff. That was really important. I guess I approached teaching online blended. Many of you know that I'm very focused on experiential exercises. For me, the notion of teaching online was really scary because it's a radical departure from what I had invested in for the last 30 years. And so it was pretty scary. Now, having done it, I would conclude that that is actually the best mode. I don't want to teach a face-to-face class purely face-to-face now, really ever again, because some content is much more effective if delivered asynchronously. Other content is more effective delivered online synchronously. And then there's other content that really does work best in a face-to-face mode. And so I'm really going to try and structure my teaching down the road so that I'm able to blend it and have the right mode for the right content. And so John raised the question of, what were you surprised about? Well, I was surprised. I was doing online discussions all wrong, and I didn't realize it. I had like one big discussion thread for the whole class. Every student was on that discussion thread. And now each module has a separate, maybe more than one separate discussion thread that is seeded with a very specific assignment. And it's actually broken into subgroups so that the discussion thread might be a discussion group of 10 or 12 students, so they can't really hide. So it makes a big difference. And then grading it turns out to be so much easier than grading participation has been for me in the past. In SpeedGrader, you can just whip through and see each person's individual contributions. So that was a big surprise. So John raised the question of what were you surprised about? Well, I was surprised how easy it was to have strong participation in online discussions. So I want you to realize that the asynchronous content is way more than just like videos. Videos can be important, but the nature of the assignments and the discussion can really bring an interactive, more vibrant content to the asynchronous component as well. I'm going to do a little exercise. I promised I would do something different. If you can scroll back up to where I put ice cream breakout in the chat. And if you're familiar with Google Docs, this will be easier. And I'm aware that sometimes Google Docs works best in Chrome and maybe not in some other browsers. So some of you may have some trouble if you're using some other browser. If you'll open the link to the Google Doc, and I'll describe what's there. But in essence, what I'm going to ask you to do is this Google Doc has 3 pages. Each page has a 5 forces worksheet in it. And the worksheet has different colors in it. And your color is assigned by the first letter of your last name. So you have a specific page in the worksheet, and then you have a color that's associated with it. So there is a specific place in the worksheet that you will go. And just to give you a little background, in the Carpenter Toolbox, I put together a live case on Zoom, the company, at the start of this. And so this worksheet has 3 5 forces analyses in there, or places for it. One is what was the industry structure of video conferencing before COVID? What is it like during COVID? And what do we think it's going to be like after COVID? And of course, there are some significant competitors that are trying to strike back on Zoom. Microsoft, WebEx, they each have different resources that they're trying to leverage to be successful in their fight back against Zoom. So it's nice because this case allows you to leverage virtually every aspect of the course. So I started the course with this because it's got a corporate level, it's got industry analysis in it, it's got unique firm resources, entrepreneurial spin-outs, just about any topic that you might want to talk about is ultimately there. So you should have found your place in that worksheet. And if you'll go to your place if you'll go to your place and enter your favorite ice cream, I would appreciate that. Please go ahead and do that now.
Where do we enter that, Russ, exactly?
Okay, on the top of the page, it says last name, and it's your first letter of the last name, and it tells you what color you are and what page of this worksheet you're going to go to. You with me?
Yeah, but where in the 5 forces do we type? So we see almond on the screen. Do we just type it anywhere?
No, so you've got a color. What is your last name now? You're group 5 purple. Do you see that?
I do, Russ.
Okay, so that means you're on page 2. You're gonna, scroll down to page 2 and you'll see purple. Write your favorite ice cream in the purple part. Notice that we now have, what is it, 50 people who are entering in the same worksheet, but you all know exactly where you're supposed to go, except for John. Other people know where they're supposed to go. And this is what I use for breakout groups. And it's really important that people know exactly where to go in the worksheet. And I think now note that each group has a different task and a different part of the worksheet, and it's actually okay if you see what other groups are doing because your task is focused. Doesn't matter if you see what other groups are doing. You can't copy from them or anything like that. The beauty of this is that you send the individuals into breakout rooms with a specific place on this worksheet that they're going to address, and then 10 minutes later they come back and you walk through the worksheet with everybody seeing it, and each group describes, what is it that their conclusion was with respect to that force, if you will. You know exactly which group you're calling on because they have a specific place. They know they have a responsibility, and it illustrates a few things. One is it's very dynamic. They love it. The students love it because they know what they're supposed to do. It's not hard to convey the instructions. They also love it because it's clear what they're going to do when they come back to the main class, right? Now, what it illustrates, I think that's important in this is that when you're doing an online session, you really have to plan things out. So I had to think about how am I going to structure this worksheet so that it's easy that everyone finds, other than John, everyone finds where they're supposed to be. And knows what the task is. But if you've sort of done that legwork, then the discussion that comes out of it is much more smooth in terms of that. All right, I'll just say that there's a second part of this, different class. So this case can extend beyond one class, where I would send them into a different worksheet. Can you see it now, the spreadsheet? Okay, so this spreadsheet is a series of financial models using Zoom's financial data. And I can send each group, black, blue, green, orange, purple, etc. I can send each group to their part of the worksheet. And each worksheet is a different financial scenario. And then I'm asking them, okay, given the scenario that you are, so this first one is, rivals withdraw, so Microsoft and WebEx are unsuccessful and back out of the market, but Zoom lacks in their innovation. Now, figure out what you think the operating margin is going to be, figure out what you think the revenue growth rate is going to be, and this is all the historical data kind of bounds your decision making. So that is kind of the essence of what I was going to show, and you know, I just wanted you to see that actually sometimes you can do things pretty pretty quickly, and you know, it breaks up your time in your synchronous session. Okay, Heather asks, what is speed grader? That's in Canvas. It's the grading function in Canvas. How much time do I schedule for discussion during the week? Well, I have the discussions where I have a specific assignment. Maybe I'll have them do a video and then they have to respond to that in the discussion with a very specific prompt. And the prompt is, answer this question and then comment on your colleagues' responses to that. And then I grade them. I have a rubric and I grade them on their response as well as the sort of interaction with other colleagues.
Okay, great. So just with a minute or so to go, so I think we should, Russ, so after we finish here, if you can provide the link to Carpenter's Toolbox.
Sure.
I think many of us are familiar with it, but those who are not will find it a really great resource to access teaching material. So I think, Peter, is it time to hand over to?
Yeah, okay, great.
Okay,
so
well, thanks very much, guys.
Yeah, fantastic, Russ. So Russ had a couple of questions that you didn't see in the chat box, and I want to bring those up. One is from Maka. You know, in Google Sheets, can you actually send people also to Zoom breakouts? So can you correspond to the Zoom number, or how do you handle it? So you use colors.
So I could I do just what I did here. So you have a regular Zoom breakout room. So just as we're going to do later here. And then the Zoom group has a tab. Each person has the tab open to look at the Google Doc, just as you did here.
Okay, so I think the confusion a little bit is because presumably you put people into the purple. Let's say if you're purple.
So in my class, these are their project groups, their term project groups. In your case, I assigned it based on the first letter of your last name.
So
right.
Peter, just a clarification. Yeah. This was not a question. I was talking about a parallel approach, just in case these are not individual practices. What I do in my own class is to just randomly send them to breakout rooms for 4 minutes, and whatever random breakout room that's assigned to them, then they go to that sheet. It's it removes confusion of students like John who couldn't find like where to go, and it directly you won't waste any time directing them. So that was more of a parallel approach.
Yeah. To defend John, I know I think why John was confused, because there were 3 things: business, government, and so forth, right? So one had to be a little bit creative in translating these instructions. So John, I understood John's confusion a bit. In any case, then okay, Anne-Christine Herfeld, she asks, Russ, how much time do you usually schedule for discussion following the worksheet task?
So, you know, this would be part of a synchronous class, and it depends on what you want them to cover. But to take this one as an example, I would say that the groups sharing back, we didn't get through all of them. So it conveyed the message that the industry structure was going to change and had changed already, which was really what my objective was to get them to think about how the industry structure evolves. So I would say, to echo what you've heard already, less is more. So you want time to debrief, but recognize that you won't be able to do everything probably.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Russ. We are moving on to our 3rd session because we are also already running a little bit behind time, but that's okay. V, take it over again.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, we indeed are in for a treat again when the next session would be on a hybrid, and Giada would be interviewing Charlie. Giada, take it away.
Thank you, Vi. Thank you, Peter. Okay, so Charlie and I, we decided to structure our 20 minutes in a slightly different way, because we're going to try and give you two complementary perspectives on hybrid. And that's because over the last term, I've been doing quite a bit of this type of teaching for about 2 months now. And Charlie, on the other end, has experienced it a bit, but afterwards we went into lockdown again. And so unfortunately, he was forced to move back to fully online. But he also has a very special position from which you can talk about hybrid, because Bocconi is a director of the degree in International Economics and Management. And as such, he interviewed and talked extensively with many different instructors and many different students, asking them about hybrid. So we will try to somehow start with a broader perspective, a kind of an aggregate perspective that Charlie will be providing, and then we'll move to some tips and examples that come from practice mostly. So I actually want to start maybe with a definition of what hybrid is. So maybe Charlie, you can tell us a little bit about what's the business model, what's the model that we use when it comes to hybrid.
So we thought we ought to be clear right up front about what hybrid meant at Bocconi. I mean, hybrid, in contrast to, say, the blended model, the pure online that we've heard about, hybrid means you're teaching at the same time. Students are there with you in class and who are online. And this happened at Bocconi because we were the university after, we had the full lockdown in the spring that many other places people didn't go through. We were very devoted once things got a little more normal over the summer to coming back in person, but there are a lot of regulations. So we could only have half the number of students in class that we usually do. Everyone was required to have masks. So over the summer, we set up with cameras, 2 cameras, one on the podium, one broader shot that would include the whiteboard next to the instructor. And we alternated students week by week. So depending on whether your student number was odd or even, you would be in class 1 week. And the program that I'm program director of, I've only teaching, actually haven't taught many undergrads in many, many years, but I am teaching in it this year. Our classes are big, they're kind of 120 to 150. So even having half the class there in person means we're talking about 50, 60 students, and the same or more online. Those students could change their registration, whether they were on campus or off campus. And as the number of cases rose, and as students made their assessment about how valuable it was to come into class under these conditions, fully masked all through class, faculty masked, we saw, well, some variety actually between classes. We saw in some classes, the numbers in attendance fall off sharply and not in others until we were kind of officially shut down. But this is really set by regional regulation and negotiation between the university and the state of Lombardy for what we did. So that's what it meant in our case. I thought it was important to be clear about that.
Absolutely, thank you. So what about the challenges? So if you, based on your interactions with the students, the instructors, what were the main challenges that were encountered, and what were the solutions that actually proved more effective?
Okay, yeah. So, and I was meeting with faculty through the summer as everyone planned for how they were going to approach this. And for many faculty, it was a relief. They were just hoping, oh God, I can go back in the classroom, teach in a way I know how, and students can follow along online when they can't be there. Of course, it's much more complicated than that. I think it's a lot like interdisciplinary research. You go into it thinking there's something for everyone to love, and you find there's something for everyone to hate. In fact, you end up with the constraints of both forms. And so it's hard to take advantage of some of the really creative solutions we've heard about from Tammy, from Russ, from Maka, because you're simultaneously, you're dealing with all these technology challenges, but you've got 60 students standing there in front of you. So I would say, and I have actually also surveyed the faculty and the students kind of after the fact, so we retained some of our memory of what happened, because now we've got this intense transition back online again. The top challenges that people mention, the very top one, I think kind of characterizes everything, is that you have different needs and speeds across these two groups. So the cognitive ability of people to absorb online is just much lower. Students are sitting somewhere, often at home. They have a lot of apps available to them. It's just the faculty member, there's not the presence pulling you in. And there's a lot of distraction. So their ability to absorb, self-reported and observed by everyone, is much lower. And so faculty are struggling with, how do I simultaneously communicate to both of them? You can think of it as two groups, but really it's three. You've got the group there in class with you. You've got a group that's live with you online, logged in for that time, but these are also recorded. There's a third group that's watching it later. So even as you're gathering up questions in chat, the group watching recorded later may not be able to see the chat. And in fact, in our case, we have students asking questions in class. The online students can't hear the students in class. We are sort of forbidden. We're in this sort of theater of sterilizing everything between every use, and so we couldn't hand a microphone around class. It was inaudible. Okay, so radically different needs and speeds across those groups. That's a big challenge. The next is the multitasking challenge. I mean, when you go into class, I did only do, I'm co-teaching with someone who was in the first part, but he was in quarantine for the first week. And so I did do the first week of class, and then I had to kind of bring our new hire and kind of introduce him to the classroom. You've got this checklist of things when you arrive there. You've got to put on the mic, you've got to log into Blackboard, you got to upload your PowerPoint, you have to turn on the online attendance system, you have to turn on the camera, you have to turn on your audio, you have to start sharing the slides once they're converted. The checklist, if you've ever gone with like an amateur pilot in a small plane, it feels a little bit like that. You're checking, every aileron, and you're looking for water in the fuel. It's complex. And so one of the top things I heard from faculty in person and in survey is they feel overwhelmed, to kind of reach a cognitive limit on how many different things you can handle. Some people have no problem having, say, the chat streaming through from online, and they just go to it every so often. That doesn't really tend to bother me, but some people are thrown by it completely. They've already reached their maximum, and the chat is dinging away. They know students are kind of commenting, asking questions, and it drives them a little crazy. And we all have our limit. Chat may be okay for some, but we all reach our limit. And so the cognitive constraints on faculty are very real as well. And the final challenge I would just mention is the impediments for interaction everywhere. I mean, with everyone distanced and masked up in class, it's even the regular classroom doesn't feel anything the same. And then you've got the impediments kind of interacting with online students. So just the bar for interaction is much, much higher. So really, really challenging. Some of the things, what we're all here for are solutions. I did kind of ask in a survey, and I've been talking to faculty and students about this. One nice message is, at root, the fundamentals of teaching still shine through. So if you ask, when I look at the ranked list of what students and faculty separately ranked as most important, it was clear, material, and class plan. It was faculty mastery of the technology, knowing what you're doing with this and kind of being comfortable. And third, it was interactions between the professor and the student. So being available for that back and forth, both with your in-person group and your online group, to clarify things, because it's harder to absorb in this setting. So the fundamentals remain the same, and students and faculty largely agree on them. That's kind of nice. You need strategies for managing engagement across the two. I said, this is a big challenge. All the faculty who are like you, who are here at this session, who came to the organized sessions I had, say, on Microsoft Teams, they were doing something in the end to manage this. But when I survey the students, I've got these faculty who also, of course, dealt with it by just ignoring the online students. And that led to a lot of frustration. They'd be like, I'm putting questions in chat and no one responds to it. So you got to have some kind of, know your cognitive limits, whatever they are. People use things like appointing a student in class who becomes the liaison for the online group. So they say, you take the questions, you interrupt at the appropriate time and ask those questions, and then I'll respond to them. Others kind of just would pause every so often, read the chat and answer things. There are a lot of idiosyncratic strategies here, but you need to have one for thinking about how you're going to alternate interacting with each group. So some faculty would alternate when they had a question, a natural place in the sort of the content delivery, because it's not just strategy professors I'm talking about, you know, it's econ, it's finance, it's accounting, but they would ask questions alternating between the online group and the in-presence group. And then using the sort of digital apps that people have talked about here, you can use those with your in-person. You can kind of get everybody in the same digital environment, whether it's a whiteboard, kind of whiteboards are getting really common for managing discussion now, because students can enter on them, they can move things around, they can sort them, whether it's having everyone in Excel to do some programming or solve some kind of finance things. Those things kind of were reported as very important. And then finally, this may be a bigger deal in Italy, where there's still a lot who say focus on a big exam at the end, but those who push continuous assessment all the way along, you sort of keep you doing assessment through assignments all the way along, not just expecting all this material to pile up. And then students who absorb it all and do well on exam at the end, that was a much more positive experience, both for the faculty and for the students. So that's, I mean,
thank you.
I guess I would say, if you ask the students what really worked well, so just a couple of interesting things. They just all really value the face-to-face. You know, when you say what worked well, they're like, oh, that week in the classroom was great. What they needed to do themselves is manage distractions. They do that with varying success, but they do report that. I did a little whiteboard exercise when we met online for the first time with some of the students. I was like, I learn well online when, and had them just on the whiteboard kind of complete that sentence. And most of it had to do with creating an environment where they could focus. And that's, you know, now that they're kind of back at home, and you know, for our undergrads, these are 18-year-olds living with a family. You know, I'm teaching in my family home here. You know, there's people running around and dogs barking, and it's hard, right? Managing distractions, and then they love the recording. Somebody mentioned this, but they do love the fact that the lectures are recorded. They can go back and rewatch tricky sections. They can do it at different speeds. That actually, most of them report as a positive upside they'd love to have in the future. So those are some of the things that I would say worked well, or helped make it less of a kind of worst of both worlds experience.
Okay, so overall, what do you think? If they were given the chance to do it again, what's the general reaction? So did they like it? Do they rather do online? What's the feedback?
Yeah, I mean, I have a nice quote from one of the students. It's really kind of playing off that famous quote that of Churchill in Democracy. You know, it's the worst system except for all the others. You know, you know, the faculty, I would say, when you ask them, would they do this again? If they had a choice between pure online and this, would they do this again? About 40% said they'd rather do just pure online. But that's still 60%. More than half said they would choose this again. And of the students, it's 85%. So I do think this is very much in our future, especially if we have a sort of a staged exit from this epidemic crisis. I expect that at some point in that, Bocconi will be back in this mode where we can't fully be quite together the way we were, and will be again. We'll be in some intermediate stage. So I do think this is going to be with us for a while. And so that's why here's where we want to pivot to you, Giada, because you had a longer period this fall teaching with hybrid, and a lot of the tips from someone who's really been solving problems there can be really helpful. So what would you say? What are your kind of big takeaways on how to do this more effectively?
Okay, so I actually prepared some slides following Maka's example, so that we kind of have it written here and it's easy to follow. So my experience comes from teaching this elective, mostly in the Master of Science, where I had these three populations that you were actually describing, right? So about 70 students, 30, 35 were in class, 15, 20 were online synchronously. And then I had about 20 students who were actually watching the recordings afterwards. So attending, but still like in a separate, at different times. And the teaching method of this course, which I co-teach with Cedric Gutierrez here at Bocconi, is it's super interactive. It's based on case discussion. We have a structure that is very similar to what Tammy was describing, right? So cases and then content interspersed, as I think most of us are used to be teaching. So the key lessons, if I have to kind of like summarize, distill the 3 things that I learned, let me actually show you, because I try to somehow come up with the main things. So first, this is one group in the end. You have one class in front of you. One class in front of you, at least during delivery. So if you want them to feel like a class, this is actually up to you, and you are the one who bring them together. So for me, this means that when I have students in class, the rule in my courses and also in the course that we share in corporate strategy, students in class should not have a laptop, because I want them to be there with me, focused in the moment. And we have research that shows that laptops are not good if you want people to perform well. So the students in class are without laptop. And then I have one person, which is a TA, to Kathy's question. I think this is an important thing that you should ask for. A person who's you are going to introduce to the class as the voice of the chat. If you don't have a TA, you can use a student and rotate among them. And this person is actually going to be the physical embodiment of all the people who are at home there with you that day. And so whenever someone has a question, this person would say, Giada, Charlie has a question. So you would stop and you would take the question. And for that, I would ask students to unmute and talk so that they actually are there with us and we can hear them, we can feel their presence. The other thing that I try to do is to mix them up when it comes to working in small groups, which I still do. I will show you in a second. And so to my students in class, I asked not to use the laptop, but to always have a laptop and earphones with them in case we need to use them for an exercise. And then I also have times where I actually completely separate the 2 groups, and so I really address them as 2 separate groups. For the in-present students, this is easy because you can chat with them before and after class, and so I try to have that kind of like the social dimension that Maka was talking about. For the online students, on the other end, what I do is that in the last class of the week, I would always set aside like 15 minutes during which I let all the in-present students go, and I would stick with the online students and talk to them about the problems that they had. And this is the way through which I learn whether they prefer me to wear a visor or to wear a mask, whether they can actually hear well when the other students are asking questions, because they would ask you the technical questions on top of the content questions. So it's important that you give them time. And for the online asynchronous, the thing that I think works the best is to document everything you're doing. Let me show you an example. This is actually to my point 2, and that is structure. So we all know that structure is important, the teaching plans, and this is all true everywhere and always. But I think in a case when you have hybrid, this becomes potentially even more important, because you're trying to think about not only how to engage people with the cases, but also how to make them work given that they are physically distanced. So this is a typical example of when you have a case A that you assign at home, they read, they engage with the case, you discuss, and then you give them a case B in class to read, comment in small groups, and then you would have a discussion. And the way in which I do this now with this system, this actually comes from this year, is I give students the option. If you are in class and you want to work with people in class, fine, do it. If you are at home, I'm going to create breakout rooms, and then you can move from one to the other so that you get together with your friends. And then if you are in class, but you have friends at home and you want to work with them, log on Blackboard and I'm going to assign you to a room there, so that I give them this flexibility, because in the end, I don't really care who they are working with. And then I give them a tool, which is very similar to what Russ was showing. In my example here is a Google Sheet, where you would basically have the space for them to write down what their group is. I would divide the class in 3 batches and say, you comment on this one solution, you look at this other one, you look at the third, and then they would find that place, their place on the Google Sheet, and they could type their answers. Then what I would do in class is to basically pull here on the board the Google Sheet live, so that they can actually see what everyone has been writing. And then the discussion that I would have would be aimed at putting together what the 3 different tools were actually, how people looking at the 3 different tools were thinking about them. So drawing comparisons and integrating all the material into one. And this you can do with the usual discussion with people talking in class, people talking at home. And finally, I document everything, which helps for people who are at home and maybe didn't feel as involved, but also for people who are watching this afterwards. So I would take pictures of the board and post the pictures. I would make this available for our students, the Google Sheet. I would also create, I know it's a lot of work, slides in which I debrief what happened and what the single groups have done, so that I actually show the students, in the spirit of what Tammy said, that I actually went through all the material that they created during class, that they actually have been listened to, that I know that they are there, and that I'm involving them with names, so that actually they know that I've been looking at their work. And the third thing would be the attitude. So I think there is a balance to strike here, and that's the fact that you are the one who's in control. You are the professor, after all. So they want to feel that you have that authority and that you know what you're doing. You're not clueless. But on the other end, you also want to embrace, I think, the fact that this is a difficult time for everyone, including yourself. And I think they're super fine with that. So this spirit of we're all learning here, we can adapt, we can be flexible. Today, I'm going to try this new tool. You tell me whether you think it works or whether I should incorporate it more. Maybe just once, but not like 3 tools at the same time. But I think like this idea of involving them in experimenting with you, making sure that they understand that you're trying to simply target and adapt at your best and show you care. And ultimately, I think all the students, I mean, I was in class today online and I asked them before preparing the slides. And the thing that really came out is that they were grateful for the possibility of being there and actually be sitting in a class. They didn't care about the mask, they didn't care about the visor, they just wanted to be there. So I think they are going to be forgiving if this is not as perfect as we are used to, because for them, the idea of having the interaction, and also for me, to be honest, the idea of actually being there in the class, I was so happy the first day. And I think this is really what makes it different for everyone. Okay. So that was it. I will, Peter, I don't know whether we should maybe move to the breakout rooms or whether you want to ask any questions specifically.